Falcons are on the road for the second straight week after their upset loss to the Saints last week down in New Orleans. This week, they're headed out west to Colorado to take on the Denver Broncos at Empower Field at Mile High Stadium. Thank you guys for joining us for the Falcons pregame show presented by Ticketmaster Taylor Vismor, Derek Rackley. We're with you for the next 30 minutes. And I mean, next week is the bye, right? You got this game, you got Monday to look at the film, and then they hit the bye on Tuesday. Big bye for this Falcons team, 12 weeks straight. Let me ask you this as a player, as a former player. When you can taste the bye, when you can see it, what is that mentality the game before, right? What's that mentality like?
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're going because there is that sense of it's almost like there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow because at this point in the season, as you mentioned, the players are looking forward to having a little bit of an off week and some unload time to kind of re-energize, if you will. But it's the difference of going into this game thinking about the bye week or going into this game thinking about beating the Broncos on the road. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I would say it goes back to the leadership of the team and the maturity of the team. Who is going to be the rallying person to say that we are out here on a business trip and our job is to beat the Denver Broncos? We are not worried about anything that happens on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or the rest of that following week. Right. We are worried about what happens right now in Denver, Colorado. So to me, that's what this all boils down to is, yes, guys are looking forward to it. They're excited. Maybe they've got some plans where they're going to take a little vacation, enjoy some family time. But you earn it. You enjoy it a whole lot more if you can go on the road and come back with another victory. And it's just so much more sweet next week.
Exactly. Both of these teams are coming off of losses from last week. But I want to talk about the Falcons' loss last week down in New Orleans against the Saints. It really felt like this fan base and the media was really unaware that the loss to the Saints was even plausible for this Falcons team. So let me ask you, from you personally, watching this film, looking at this team, knowing what you know about this team, what did you take away from that loss against the Saints last week?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and it's a game that slipped through your fingers, right? A team that is reeling, that's got a ton of injuries, did not have a lot of playmakers in the game. They lost 7 straight games. You're thinking, Atlanta Falcons have more momentum than New Orleans Saints do in this matchup, and they should be able to go. Even though they got to go on the road, they should be able to come back and get a victory. And some would say that's what's great about the National Football League is just because a team is reeling, they've lost 7 straight games, it's not like they're a walkover. There's still pros on that team. There's still very talented coaches, and obviously they were playing for the excitement of their new interim coach, so that kind of elevates everything a little bit. You look at the stats, and Atlanta pretty much dominated the stats. They did have the costly turnover at the end, and they did have the 3 missed field goals. Sometimes that's all it takes in the National Football League. You get close to the goal line, you get in the red zone, you're not able to cap those drives off with touchdowns, you got to settle for field goals, and that you can end up pulling one left. You can get one blocked. Those things happen, unfortunately, and that's how you get beat in the National Football League. I'm not saying Atlanta took New Orleans for granted. I'm saying New Orleans did a pretty good job of coaching around some of their deficiencies to stay in the game, and then Atlanta just wasn't able to take advantage of a few opportunities they had.
Yeah, I've asked you, I think 3 weeks in a row or 3 weeks just in general this season, when these teams that the Falcons are going to play have lost the last couple, they're looking for a win. They need a win more than maybe the Falcons need a win, it feels like. And I've asked you over and over this season is what's more dangerous, a team that's on a roll, has kind of found their stride, or a team that desperately needs a win? And I think last week you saw it with the Saints is that they had a new interim head coach that came in and breathed new life into that team, and they came in and they showed that, hey, we're the same Saints that we were in week 2 or week 3, whatever it might be. We're the same players and we have the same vision and we're still here. We can still win games. This is the thing, though. I think a lot of fans after that game and a lot of people in the media especially we're kind of scratching their heads thinking, what is this Falcons team? What's going on here? And the thing I think that everyone needs to remember is that when you look back at week 1, or probably even in the preseason, I don't think that you would look at the schedule that the Falcons had and think, oh, the Falcons are going to go 6-0 in the NFC South. I don't know that many people, maybe some people didn't even know that they were going to split down the middle 3-3.
Right.
We just didn't know what was going to be able for this Falcons offense, what they were going to be able to do in the NFC South. So I think the reactions coming out of that one loss loss. It's the only NFC South loss that this Falcons team has so far this season. They're 4-1 in the NFC South. The reactions of that game, I think, were a little much, because here's the thing that you have to see. The graphic of the NFC South standings was just on the screen. The Falcons are still 2 games up above the Buccaneers. They lost last week to the 49ers. I mean, what are your thoughts? How do you you're a player, and you know how to just kind of rub it off and move forward. Like, what were your thoughts of the reactions of it all from everyone?
Yeah, I mean, that's 2 kind of completely different questions. Is the players' view and coaches' view, internal view on that game, and then it's everybody else, the media, the outside world, because that's what coaches always want to talk about, is protecting inside of our walls, right? And so Coach Raheem Morris is going to go do the press conferences. He's going to go talk to all the different media, because that's his job as a head coach in the National Football League, much as the players as well. But once all that stuff is done, they sit down in the team meeting rooms, they sit down in the locker room. It's all, hey, let's protect this house. Let's not let any of that outside noise make its way inside of our house and start kind of tainting the view of the players. As long as that doesn't happen, everything's fine. Yes, you're going to lose games in the National Football League. You got to be able to learn from them and then put them behind you. Are they still a really good football team? Yes. I understand from a media perspective, maybe it's more understandable if they would have lost to Tampa Bay and not a reeling Saints team or a bad Carolina team this year. But that's just the reality of the National Football League sometimes. So as a player, you got to tune all that stuff out. You got to tune out. And it's harder now, because when I played, we didn't have social media. I know it makes me sound like an old fart up here, but it's the truth. There's so much news going around in all these different avenues now, when before it was basically just on the news or in the newspaper. Anytime these guys turn on their phone now, they're getting an alert that has something to do with their team.
Yeah. Well, last week, obviously, the Falcons did lose to the New Orleans Saints, but someone that came out kind of victorious from that was Bijan Robinson. He had his 5th straight game of 100 yards or more from scrimmage. This guy has been on a roll all season. It feels like he's really hit his stride in kind of his sophomore season here, his 2nd year in the league. When you look at Bijan Robinson, I know we've talked about him a lot this season and the maturity that you've seen in him so far in this 2nd season for him in the league. What are you seeing, and how do you think Zach Robinson has been using him as that Swiss Army knife that he seems to really be?
Such an electric player, and I would say I've been raving about him as an individual. And I think sometimes I need to take a step back in being, what do they say, fanboying about him so much, because I'm such a fan of the way that he plays the game and all of his skill sets and the things that he makes look super easy, which are completely not easy, okay? When you see him stop and start, make somebody miss and break 3 tackles, and then all of a sudden he just runs out of bounds, picks up 9 yards, and just kind of turns around, runs back to the huddle, everybody's like, oh yeah, Bijan Robinson. You don't understand how difficult it truly is what he is doing game in, game out, play in, play out. Now, what I mean by taking a step back is, you got to remember, part of the reason that Bijan is having all this success is he's got a really good offensive line in front of him, and he finally has a signal caller, a quarterback behind this offense that it really is forcing the defense to be honest. We've seen how many teams have struggled to slow down Pitts, in Mooney, in London, in McLeod, and all these different receiving options downfield, and then all of a sudden they're thinking about slowing down the passing game, and here comes Bijan Robinson, right? That's what you want as an offense. But Atlanta didn't have that in years past. They had some new guys coming in on the offensive line, and they didn't have the quarterback to keep defenses honest. So, yes, Bijan is a great player. I love everything that he does, but this success that he's having right now in his 2nd year is largely a product of everything that's working around him as well.
I could not agree more with you, especially with that offensive line, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But you named off some of those pass catchers that this Falcons team has: Pitts, Mooney, London. And I want to say this, with those 3, you add Bijan Robinson, you add Kirk Cousins, those are 5 players on this Falcons team that rank in the top 10 in their respective positioning groups. It's the only team in the NFL that has 5 players in the top 10 of their respective positions. When you look at this, Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, Drake, I mean, look, they're like household names now, right? For the Falcons. What do you make of this? I mean, yes, you had the loss last week, but these guys are still lighting up the stat sheet, and they're still on top of their respective position groups.
I would say that looking at that list, that was probably expected. That's the reason why they paid Kirk Cousins what they paid him. We all knew what Bijan Robinson had in the tank. Drake London as well being a first-round pick, Kyle Pitts being a first-round pick. I think the question mark was, can Darnell Mooney truly be that second option? Maybe he, of that list, is the one question mark that you could go back before the season to say, well, this is what we hope is going to happen, but not quite sure it actually is going to happen. So now that I step back and I look at all these names and I say, yeah, these are all really good players. This is what you hope as a coaching staff, as a personnel department in the offseason when you assemble this cast of characters. But guys need to play to their potential, number one. And number two, they got to stay healthy. And that's what happens. So many teams come into the National Football League with nucleuses that look like the one that you saw on the screen, but either somebody doesn't perform up to their expectation or somebody gets hurt, right? And so then a cast of 5 ends up earning its way down to 3 or 2. Fortunately for Atlanta, they've had health on their side offensively, and these playmakers have all been doing their job, making plays and actually performing. So that's the reason why you see all these 5 guys in the top 10 in their respective position groups.
Yeah, you look at all 5 of those guys in their position groups, like those are the big names in their room, except for Bijan Robinson, because there's another name in his position group that is just as much of a shining star as he is. That's Tyler Algier. I actually had the opportunity to sit down with both Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier earlier in the week to talk to them about what's so special about being 2 running backs in this room for the Falcons. Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson, thank you for sitting down with me. You guys are such a dynamic duo. Like, the list kind of goes on with how similar y'all are in your running styles, but I think also you're so different. So I want you to kind of explain the other person's playing style. So Bijan, how would you explain Tyler's running style?
Obviously, he has so much power. When he runs with his pass, so it's just hard to take him down off of first contact because he's always moving forward with so much momentum. And then, he has good feet. Like, people might not understand, like, with Ty, like, he has good feet, in the hole. That's why he has angry runs every week because, like, defenders are already intimidated, but then he can make a move off of that to, be more explosive. So
it was very touching, man. Now, for B, literally quick and agile, I think his ability to start and stop is freaking crazy. He always makes a defender stop his feet, and once a defender does that, it's over with. It's his ability just to play make really being an all-around back. I think everyone underestimates his strength because B runs with his pads, and I think he's grown with that every game, every play. So I think that's what really just keep growing to be the best player he can be, and I think that's what's awesome, just being able to see that.
Zach Robinson, the play caller for this offense, he says that with you two, he can really do whatever. What is it like for the both of you to be able to kind of be those plug-and-play running backs together?
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. I think it just puts a lot of respect to our game, and just being able to, B's not in, and this is his personnel, but I can do it. Or, it's 3rd and 1. Like, you want Tyler? No, like B can do it. Like, just being able to really just trust. I think just that's the biggest thing, trust. And being in those situations, just any situation that we put in.
A lot of teams, they have one running back that goes in, and that's their main guy. And then the second guy is like, all right, the defense can, like, kind of relax and then look for other. But with me and him, like, you got to be on lock every single play because, him and I are just one play away from breaking a big one. It doesn't matter what we get, a pass or a run, and that's why I think that we're so dynamic when it comes to all three and do it all running back.
The full-length feature of Bijan and Tyler will be out later this week on Falcons YouTube. And Rackley, something that I wanted to ask you about, not just these two, but the offense in general, is that what Zach Robinson said about this running back group is that they can really do whatever they want. It doesn't have to be just a couple of plays for Bijan and just a couple of plays for Tyler, but I feel like that's also the same with your pass catchers as well. Everyone can kind of plug and play. How lethal is having people like that on your offense that can plug and play, doesn't matter the down or the distance for you?
Yeah, I mean, it makes you dangerous, and that's the reason why the Atlanta Falcons have quietly become one of the best offenses this year in the National Football League. When you look at them statistically, it's because of all these different players. And just think about some of the moments, too, this year. Drake London banged up a couple of times in game. What happens? Kadero Hodge ends up coming in and winning a game on Thursday Night Football against the Buccaneers. Ray McLeod, injury. He ends up stepping up. He makes some big-time catches, and he's kind of down on the depth chart a little bit, if you will, just because there's so much talent ahead of him. And as I mentioned, there hasn't been any injuries that have thrusted him into more meaningful action, at least game after game. And then you have maybe one of the biggest matchup nightmares at the tight end position, and Kyle Pitts. When he ends up getting open, he ends up making defenses pay. And so we haven't even talked about the two guys that you just saw in the feature, and I loved what they ended up saying towards the end of it, is with both of those guys, when they come in the game, a defense never gets to get a play off. You always have to focus on who's in the backfield, because sometimes when they bring that second string, they bring the third string guy in there, he's a passing down back, right? He's going to chip, and then he's going to get out into his route. Whereas it could be 3rd and 6, and Atlanta could hand the ball off to either of these running backs and feel confident that maybe they pick up the first down.
And I love that quote as well, because you hear that from Tyler and Bijan, and then when you go back and watch the Mooney and Drake feature, they said, I love when we line up on the same side, because you have to decide who you're going to cover. One of us is going to get the ball, and you have the duty to figure out which one of us you should, flip the coin on. So having 4 of those guys on your team that are here to play, make an impact in any way that you ask them is huge. Let's kind of flip to this Falcons defense, though, quickly before we kind of get into this Denver Broncos team. When you watched them last week, right, they gave up a handful of points in the first half, but then the second half, they held New Orleans to a field goal. What have you been seeing from this Falcons defense? Either progression, regression, what have you been seeing from the Falcons defense?
I would definitely say they're resilient. I've been saying this all year. They're kind of bend, not break. And I think we say that because they haven't been the team that gets after the quarterback. It's been a discussion that we've had all season long. And it's also a defense that has gotten takeaways, but it hasn't been something that they've made each and every week, right? And when you get sacks and when you get a ton of takeaways on defense, that's when you kind of graduate from being a bend but not break in a stifling defense. And I think that's what everybody wants to be. But in order to be upper echelon in the National Football League, that's what you have to do. You look at some of the best defenses, they stop the run, they get after the quarterback, they create takeaways. That's how you be a stifling defense. It doesn't matter what level that you have. So right now it's kind of bend, not break, giving their team and their offense a chance to win every game in the second half. But sometimes when you work for the organization, you play for them, you're hoping that you make a couple of plays and you can just open it up and things are a little bit more comfortable and not every game comes down to the wire.
Yeah, I know that I feel like many of the guys in the defense kind of go in the locker room and think, I would like to come in this locker room and not have to figure out what humongous adjustments we need to make for the second half of this game. But someone I want to talk about specifically as we now transition to the Denver Broncos conversation is Justin Simmons. Of course, Falcons acquired him through free agency during training camp, a late free agent acquisition for this Falcons defense. He's going back to Denver where he was drafted. He's only played in Denver before the Falcons. What is this moment like? I know that you're not Justin Simmons, but what is this moment like for him, do you think?
I mean, it is a big moment for him because, as you said, this is an organization that drafted him, played his first 8 years of his career, had 30 interceptions during his time with the Denver Broncos, former 3rd-round pick, and he was a 4-time second-team All-Pro selection. So regarded across the league as one of the best at his position throughout his time with the Denver Broncos. So yes, it's a new time for him. He's traded in his jersey for another colored one, and now his allegiances are with Atlanta. So what does he do? He goes over there, and yes, pregame, postgame is going to be a whole lot of handshakes and hugs because there's going to be a lot of friends, a lot of close teammates on that team, even people on the coaching staff. But once we get into the middle of the game, he's all about his Atlanta Falcons brothers. And even more so, trying to make the plays that he has to make, not trying to do too much, but make the plays that he has to make to kind of show his former team what they're missing. Exactly. And maybe why they didn't offer him the big contract that he probably wanted, but Atlanta very happy to get him when they did.
Exactly. Like you said, 30 interceptions in his time in Denver. Let's talk about who he's going to try to pick off today. Bo Nix, Rookie of the Week after that Week 10 game against the Kansas City Chiefs. They almost beat the Chiefs. They're 9-0 right now, looking into Week 10. But let's talk about Bo Nix. What have you seen from this rookie so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that you kind of would have suspected out of him for a couple of reasons. Went to Oregon, was an extremely accurate passer, right? That's what you want to see in the college game because, Taylor, when you get to the NFL, all of those windows shrink down immensely, right? So in order for a college quarterback, to me, to have really good success in the National Football League, you've got to be an elite processor, and that has to be shown through your stats in college. I'm talking 70% plus completion rate, because when you come into the NFL, just bump that number down by about 10% because that's how much more difficult it's going to be. Then you couple that with the fact that Bo Nix is an ultimate competitor. This guy hates to lose, loves to win, and he's going to give every single thing that he has each and every game. Then, on top of that, he's got some athleticism. This is a guy that wants to throw the football, but he's got that athleticism, 5th in the NFL right now as far as rushing yards as a quarterback, and there's some pretty good ones above him. Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, some pretty good athletic quarterbacks ahead of him, and Bo Nix is number 5. It's not something that he wants to do, but he is willing and able to do it, especially when the defense breaks down and he sees a lane that he can take advantage of. So you couple all of those things together. Elite processor, high completion rate when he was in college, competitor, and then the athleticism to move around in the pocket and pick up first downs. That's the reason why he's having some early success. Even though the Broncos sit at 5-5, to have a rookie quarterback come in and doing what he's doing is still pretty impressive. They're going to have to be on their P's and Q's defending him today.
You brought up athletic quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, just to name a couple of those that you named. Let me ask you this, because when you watch Bo Nix and you hear about how people talk about him, they always say he wants to beat you through the air, but he can also kind of scramble around and make some things happen on his feet. But I would not go as far as to call him a dual threat quarterback. So let me ask you this. With the Bo Nix and this rookie class coming in, and the rookie classes after him that will ultimately come in, is this the new kind of pro-style quarterback that the NFL needs to be ready to see? A guy that wants to beat you through the air, is looking to beat you through the air, but he can extend plays if he absolutely needs to with his legs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it and you kind of see what has come into the league. I mean, not everybody is like Lamar Jackson, but just think about like Josh Allen. I mean, he's a big, strong quarterback, and he wants to sit in the pocket, but he's got the athleticism to go out there and not only run, but to run people over on occasion. So yes, I mean, I look at some of the college guys right now, the Cam Wards of the world, Shedeur Sanders of the world, Dylan Gabriels of the world. These guys are all elite passers, but they all still have a little bit of athleticism to be able to pick up a first down, which is basically all you're looking for them to do. If it's 3rd and 5, everything breaks down. Do you got what it takes to be able to get us 5.5, right? Get us 5.5 yards to keep this drive going. Now, am I going to say that we're not going to see the Tom Brady's, the Peyton Mannings, the Kirk Cousins of the world? I'm not going to say that, because there's still going to be those guys that show in college that they are maybe the next one of those. Maybe the next Patrick Mahomes, dare I say, that type of player ends up coming out. But yes, having the ability to be an assassin as far as through the air, but still have enough athleticism, just enough to be able to pick up some yards in the run game, because they find out real quick, your job in the NFL, the quarterback position, is not running the football. Yeah. That's how you end up on the injured list.
Let's kind of talk about the weapons that he has around him, more specifically in the backfield behind him, because this running back position has been really interesting over the last, really for the first 9 weeks of this season. Javonte Williams obviously was their #1 running back, and then last week against the Chiefs, he only had 1 carry for 1 yard. What's going on with the Denver Broncos and their running game?
Yeah, but sometimes it's like a team's looking for a spark. Like they haven't gotten the production that they've been looking for. You mentioned Javonte Williams still leading the team by a long shot when it comes to carries. I think he's got 40 more carries than anybody else on the roster, and he's leading this team in yards. But yes, it was kind of absent from the game last week. So Audric Estime, the rookie out of Notre Dame, 5th-round pick, he was the one that got the lion's share of the carries last week. 14 carries for 53 yards, and just trying to find somebody to give them a spark in the running game so they can get some more balance. This is a team that has not been dominant at all in the run game. Offensively, they have not been really dominant, but they've been good enough to compete. So yes, the move to Estime is trying to give them a little bit more depth in the running back room, but trying to find somebody that provides a little bit more of a spark to help Bo Nix out in this passing game so they truly have a little bit of balance in the backfield.
You bring up that passing game. Let's kind of get to the guy that I think most teams star when they look at the Denver Broncos. That's Courtland Sutton. When you see him and the connection that he and Bo Nix have together, what are you seeing from Sutton this season?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing a guy that's going to get the lion's share of the targets, and everybody knows that. And I think that's part of the reason why the production as far as touchdowns is nowhere near what he or this offense is looking for. But you can see from the left side, Courtland Sutton, and then the next 2 guys that are behind them as far as receptions go, 2 guys basically add up to just a little bit more in receptions, but no, again, nowhere near the production. Just 1 touchdown combined between those other 2 guys. Again, just kind of shows that this offense has not necessarily been electric through the pass, but Courtland Sutton is going to receive a lion's share of the targets today. So whether Atlanta just plays left and right with their corners or somebody follows him around like we've seen on occasion from A.J. Terrell, but this is going to be their biggest receiving threat. But then again, I always look back to the New Orleans Saints last week, right? We didn't think Marquez Valdez-Scantling was going to end up having the game that he did against Atlanta, but he did. That's why you can't take anybody else for granted on the roster just because you're trying to focus on one guy that you think is going to be the focal part of the game plan. Still got to go out there, you got to play the scheme that's sent in from the sideline, and then you got to go execute no matter who's on the other side of the line of scrimmage.
You brought it up earlier saying that this Denver Broncos offense doesn't really jump off the page to you. When you look at the stats and the touchdowns and the yards, not really jumping off the page, but their defense does. Specifically, their defensive line, they're like second in the NFL right now in sacks, 35 sacks on the season so far. When you look at this defensive line and really the Denver Broncos defense altogether, it is one of the more dangerous defenses in the league. How do you kind of stop their production if you can?
Yeah, a couple defensive linemen that have 5 sacks apiece, but I would also extend it to the linebackers. They're more like a 3-down front defense, and their linebackers get involved in the pass rush just as much as their defensive linemen. Nick Bonito, their weak side linebacker, he's got 7 sacks on the season, and then you got Jonathan Cooper, he's the Sam linebacker, he's got 6.5 sacks on the season. So it's not necessarily your traditional defensive end or even the tackles that are dominating inside, much like we saw with Aaron Donald when he was active in the NFL. It's these linebackers that are getting into the mix, not only active pass rush, but also with tackles as well. Big part of the defense. But you look at D-line, linebackers. We're also going to talk a little bit about Pat Surtain as well. On the backside, there's talent at all 3 levels. And not only are there good playmakers, the stats and the production has backed it up all season.
Yeah, this Denver offense might not have a ton of touchdowns this season, but their Denver defense isn't allowing a lot of touchdowns this season. They're ranked 4th in the NFL for points per game at 17.7 points per game. They are very good in the red zone. They're very good at making sure that the team they're going up against is not getting into the end zone. How does this create a problem for this Falcons offense, who has struggled in the red zone this season?
Yeah, and it's not just one area. Sometimes you'll see a defense that they excel against the pass, but they're not great against the run, or vice versa. But I think you look at this defense and top to bottom, they've been pretty good when it comes to both sides of it. Yards per play first in the National Football League at just 4.7. And of course, you already talked about the sacks, just behind the New York Giants and second most in the National Football League with 35. And it's not just one player. I mean, there's 5 or 6 guys that are getting after opposing quarterbacks. So you've got to have success in both areas, but I think it all starts up front with the offensive line. Your communication's got to be great. Execution, you got to control the line of scrimmage. And when you do get into predictable passing situations, and you know this Broncos defense is going to pin their ears back, we'll get into that blitz rate a little bit later. You've got to make sure your offensive line performs, great technique, and sometimes you might see the running backs this week with some chips on their way out, or the tight ends with a little forearm shimmy, just to try to make sure some of these pass rushers get pushed over to the top of their tackles to make sure they're in good position to protect Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, it's going to be a tall task for this offensive line today as they try to keep the defensive line off of Kirk Cousins and give him a clean pocket all game long. Let's kind of talk about Pat Surtain for a second here. He is one of the best corners in the league right now with this Denver defense. Talk to me about what you see in him as a corner and why he is so good in this position right now.
Lockdown, obviously, comes with the family. His dad was in the National Football League the same time that I was playing. Played at an extremely high level at Alabama, coached with the best on the defensive side there. Got 3 interceptions this year, does have a 100-yard pick 6. But it's the bravado and the confidence that he brings. That's what really all the premier corners in the National Football League. Good, look, everybody that comes in as a first-round pick in the NFL, second-round pick, if you will, they're going to have immense talent. They're going to have the speed, the quickness, the hips, the playmaking ability, but it's the bravado and the confidence that you have, especially at an early age coming in the National Football League. Do you believe when you line up against a Drake London or a DeAndre Hopkins or a Devontae Adams or all the Justin Jefferson, do you believe that you not only belong, but that you're going to shut this guy down? And Pat Surtain has done that throughout the course of his young career. So as we talked about, Denver's got playmakers, D-line, linebackers, defensive backfield. It's going to be a challenge, especially for Atlanta playing on the road. But as we already talked about, The playmakers are there for Atlanta. Now it's just about execution. You got to trust the game plan, but the players have to go out and execute.
We talked about it earlier with Drake and Mooney. I very quickly mentioned it, is when they line up on the same side, you got to pick one. And I think a big question coming into this game for Surtain and for this defense is, who is he going to cover? Who is he going to look at and lock in on? Is it going to be London or is it going to be Mooney? If you're telling him who to cover, who are you telling him to cover today?
I'm not saying I'm following anybody for the Falcons. I'm saying that he's either going to stay on a side or he's just going to play what the call is coming in from the defense. Because sometimes, like I said, there is a Justin Jefferson on the other side, and then there's a big drop-off when it comes to the next receiver. And I think you look at Atlanta, and this year there has not been big drop-off at all between Drake London and Darnell Mooney. So if you want to just sit there and say, I'm going to follow Drake London around, okay, that's fine. Darnell Mooney and Ray McCloud and Kyle Pitts, they can go ahead and take the lion's share of the catches, and Atlanta can still be successful moving the ball down the field. So I'm not quite sure this is the game where Pat Surtain is going to be following somebody around the field. It could happen, but I just think there's too many receiving targets here for Atlanta for you to focus on just one guy.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has a very tall task as well today on that side of the defense. So let's kind of get to the inactives, because I brought up Mooney, I brought up London. They were both on the injury report coming into the game today. They were not given a game designation, which is a good sign on injury reports. Obviously, Drake London with that hip injury, he's fine. He's going to be good to go. Darnell Mooney working through an Achilles injury. He was a light participant in practice this week, but he is good to go as well. But what's going on for this inactives list for the Falcons today is that three players on the secondary, cornerbacks to be specific, are out for this Falcons team. That's going to be D. Alford, Mike Hughes, Antonio Hamilton. They're all out today. Let's kind of talk about those three. Those are big misses. You got Mike Hughes, who plays across from A.J. Terrell, and then you have D. Alford, who's normally your nickel.
Yep.
What are you seeing when you're not missing just not one, not two, but three of your corners today?
Yeah, well, we're all likely going to see a heavy dose of Clark Phillips in this game, which we have the last couple of weeks. And what also is going to happen is you got to figure out, and again, I haven't been at practice, so I don't know the answer to this question, but Kevin King is another corner that's going to be active in this game, and he's somebody that could potentially fill in as that nickel role. But what you also see sometimes is, do they decide to bring in another safety to end up playing that nickel role? So that'll be interesting to see what the plan is from Jimmy Lake, because you have a couple corners. Again, we've talked all season long, Taylor, about Atlanta having health this year, and finally, as we get later on in the season, guys are starting to get not only nicked up, but to the point to where they can't play in the game. So that's going to be a concern in the defensive backfield in this game. But again, maybe not so much felt because you're not going up against a truly elite passing offense. Again, I don't ever want to sit back here and say you can take a play off and it's okay not to have two starters because you're not playing a great offense. They still have NFL players. They still have professionals. But not having those guys is definitely going to be an area of focus for Atlanta going into this game.
Cornerback Natrone Brooks was also elevated and signed with a 53-man roster earlier this week. He will be active today to hopefully fill in some holes with Mike Hughes, Alford, and Hamilton being out. Troy Anderson is going to be out today after tweaking his knee again for the second time against the New Orleans Saints. And J.D. Bertrand will be out again today with a concussion. Someone else that has a concussion, Charlie Warner, the tight end.
Yeah.
Big miss for the Falcons, especially with this running offense. When you talk to Bijan and Tyler Algier, they always give the flowers, not just to this offensive line, but to Charlie Warner as well, because of how great of a blocking tight end that he is. Ross Dwelley is more than likely going to be able to step in for him. They don't play a ton of 12 personnel. They play a lot of 11. But how big of the misses are Troy Anderson, and then on the offensive side of the ball, Charlie Warner?
First of all, I'm impressed with you with the 12 and 11 personnel.
Come on, guys.
Like, look at you.
Listen.
Taylor learning over here in her second year
guys.
on the pregame show. But you're right. We talked about Charlie Warner earlier. I think we talked about him last week, kind of one of the unsung heroes on this team and what he's been doing in the running game. Not featured in the passing game. That role gets turned over to Kyle Pitts. But yes, Ross Dwelley may see an expanded role, or it just might be a game plan that's not as much two tight end set. It's Kyle Pitts on the field. They feel like they're going to end up running the football with him there. Maybe they decide to go opposite of him. Maybe they decide to throw the football a little bit more. Again, not being at practice, don't necessarily know, but we think Dwelley might be a little bit more involved from the tight end position. But one thing I know is that there's so many options here offensively. Yes, you may have to adapt a little bit when you don't have that big road grader tight end in there like Charlie Werner has been, but they still have a lot of playmakers to move the ball in this offense.
Let's go ahead and get to the keys to the game presented by Wells Fargo today. You got 3 for me. What's your first one of the day?
First one is going to be touchdowns over field goals, and I would make that argument basically any game, but especially when you're going on the road. You get an opportunity to get down in your opponent's territory. You got to find a way to convert in the red zone and punch the football into the end zone. Yes, there was so much discussion last week about the missed field goals from Younghoe Koo. I would like to think that he's going to respond and he's going to have a big-time game this week. But at the end of the day, yes, he is a field goal kicker. We want to rely on him. But let's not make it all his job. Let's punch the ball in the end zone and end up getting touchdowns. Let's get 7 versus 3 when you're playing on the road. Put the pressure on the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, I want to bring up this with Koo as well. Obviously, last week, like you mentioned, missed the 3 field goals, made 1 of the 4. This week at practice, though, obviously was practicing field goals. But what was so great about this week at practice was it was super windy up at Flowery Branch. There was a ton of wind like they're probably going to be having in Denver today. He's not going to go into an environment where he's like, I haven't kicked in wind in 3 weeks. I don't know what I'm doing over here. I'm throwing grass in the air, trying to figure out how fast it is, how tough that wind is. So for him to be able to come in earlier in the week and practice with wind and making those field goals, don't know if anyone heard me say that, made the field goals against that wind is really heartening to hear going into Denver.
The other thing that I'll say, you know what kickers love, especially right before the bye week? Going to Denver to kick.
Yeah.
Younghoe Koo's going to be warming up, and he's like, dang, I'm good from 64 today. Okay. That thin air, the kickers always love going to Denver. So I guess for him and the Falcons, hopefully he does have an opportunity to kind of mend some of those mistakes from last week, because he personally would like nothing better than to have an opportunity to go out there and drill 3 field goals going to the bye week with a much better taste in his mouth than he did last week.
Exactly. Let's get to the second key to the game today. What you got?
It's going to be handle the pass rush. We've talked about it. Second in the National Football League with 35 sacks. But here, I told you I was going to get back to this. Broncos, highest blitz rate in the National Football League, 43.1% per Next Gen Stats. So what does that mean? This offensive line, tight ends, running backs, you're likely going to see a good bit of pressure in this game. It's something the Denver Broncos like to do. Even though Atlanta has playmakers, what do? You do what you do best, right? And then Denver has been rushing the passer with their defensive linemen, with their linebackers, but they've also been bringing pressure. And that pressure may come from the linebackers, but it may come from secondary as well. Atlanta has repped this. They've drilled it all week. They've seen the same blitz rate in all their film breakdown, and they've ran scout team cards and different plays against it. But it's just seeing it on the other and actually in the game when Kirk knows he's got a chance of getting hit, and this offensive line picking it up. But also there's their opportunity for a wrinkle. Just because you haven't seen it on tape doesn't mean it's not going to come. You got to be able to adapt to situations that happen in game.
Exactly. I forgot to mention this during inactives, though. Drew Dahlman will be active today. He was elevated from IR and he was not on the inactives list, so he will be dressing today. It's going to be really interesting to see who's snapping the ball, whether that's Ryan Newsel, who has stood his ground very well after Drew Dahlman went out earlier in the season, or if Drew Dahlman will have the right to come back in, get that starting position back, and be snapping the ball back to Kirk Cousins. We're going to see what happens today and if they can keep that pocket clean for him as he tries to get the ball downfield. Third and final key is going to be defend the off-script plays. So this is probably another one of those keys where you're saying, well, what does that mean, Derek? Okay, well, when things break down for Bo Nix in this Denver Broncos offense, we talked about it before, 5th in the National Football League as far as quarterbacks rushing the football this season. It's going to happen at some point in this season. So off script, whether it's when Bo Nix runs or when his protection breaks down and he's scrambling outside the pocket, that's generally when you find wide open receivers downfield. So we call it plaster, right? Make sure you get all over the top of the eligible receivers that are in your zone, whether it's your coverage responsibility or not. And then the linebackers and defensive linemen have to get out of the stack, get away from the offensive lineman and get in the play on Bo Nix. So he doesn't take a 3rd and 7 and pick up 8, pick up a first down, keep the drive going. You've got to get him off the field when you have those opportunities. Those are the off-script plays. There you go. All right. Week 11, the week before bye. I have my preference.
Bum, bum, bum. You got to have like some dramatic music come in or something.
We're doing
like
too
that.
much. Okay, I had the same preference from last week because it did not happen for this Falcons offense last week. I need this Falcons offense to come in, play fast, get on the board quickly, and win this game early. I think when you come in and you're stale those first 2-3 drives, you can't get anything done in the red zone. You got to call on Koo. That just makes the game longer.
Yep.
It makes it harder. It puts so much more pressure on your defense, which they have been able, we talked about it earlier today, to bend and not break. But I would like to see this Falcons offense win and win early today against Denver.
Win early, win a lot.
All right, we're going to let you guys go because the game starts at 4:05. It's on Fox for you guys that are around in the region of Atlanta or up in Colorado. I don't know where all of you guys live. Who knows? If you can't watch it on Fox, it is on NFL Plus. But we'll see you guys not next week, but in week 13 against the Chargers back in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Bye, guys.